I've never been the type to handle failure well, and when I lost my job a few months ago, it hit me hard. I'd been with the same company for nearly a decade, and watching it shut down left me adrift. I decided I needed some time alone, something to clear my mind and maybe figure out what to do with my life. I've always enjoyed hiking, so I thought a week-long solo trek through the Appalachian Mountains would be the perfect escape. I packed only the essentials and a small notebook to jot down my thoughts. Just me and nature for 7 days. At first it was everything I hoped for. The crisp air, the silence broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot, and the wind whispering through the trees. It felt freeing to leave the chaos of daily life behind. The first couple of nights were peaceful, though lonely. My small campsite was simple but cozy, and I always fell asleep staring up at the star-filled sky, something I hadn't done in years. The solitude felt refreshing, at least until the third day when things started to take a strange turn. I was following a lesser-known trail, marked only by faded ribbons tied to tree branches, when I came across the first abandoned campsite. At first I didn't think much of it. It's not unusual to stumble upon signs of other hikers. But something about it felt off. The tent was torn, as if it had been left behind in a hurry, and clothes were scattered across the ground, smeared with mud. There was a metal mug lying on its side, with dried coffee stains still visible inside. I lingered for a while, trying to imagine what might have happened, but eventually decided to move on, chalking it up to someone's carelessness. Later that same day I stumbled upon another campsite. This one was in worse shape. Food wrappers littered the ground, and there were deep scratch marks along the torn fabric of the tent. The uneasy feeling in my chest grew stronger. Something wasn't right. No matter how much I tried to brush it off, my mind kept conjuring scenarios of what could have happened. When night fell, I set up my own camp, but I struggled to sleep. That was the night I first heard the screams. The screams were faint, almost like whispers, but unmistakably human. They seemed distant, as though someone was calling for help far away. I lay still in my sleeping bag, my heart pounding as I strained to listen. At first I thought it might be my imagination playing tricks on me after a long day. But the screams came again, a little clearer this time, and I could swear I heard words like, "Help," or "Please." Gripping my flashlight, I stepped out of the tent, sweeping the area with the beam of light. There was nothing, just the trees, tall and unmoving, like silent witnesses. The next morning, the forest felt different, heavier, as though the air itself was weighing me down. Everything around me seemed normal, but the eerie feeling of being watched refused to leave. I pushed on, trying to shake off the previous night's unease. A few hours into the hike, I found yet another campsite. This one was the most unsettling by far. The tent was completely shredded, like something had ripped it apart with savage force. Abandoned boots lay nearby, and a small waterlogged journal sat in the dirt. I picked it up and flipped through its soggy pages, but most of it was illegible, except for the repeated phrase, "They found me." By then, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was seriously wrong. The following nights were even worse. The screams, which had once been distant, now seemed closer, more insistent. "Is anyone out there?" I shouted, desperate to prove to myself that there was a rational explanation for all of this. But the only reply was the echo of my own voice. When I returned to my tent, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My lighter, which I'd left beside the small stove, was now lying a few feet away on the ground. I was certain I hadn't moved it. On the fifth night, the screams were so close they felt like they were inside my head. And that's when I realized something even more horrifying. They weren't just calling for help. They were calling my name. It was impossible since I hadn't seen a single soul for days. My mind spiraled, torn between fear and logic. I decided that the next morning, I would abandon the trail and head back, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. The next morning, I was determined to leave, but the forest seemed to have other plans. The trees, which had once felt like comforting companions, now loomed over me, closing in. I walked for hours, but the path seemed unfamiliar, as if it had changed overnight. When I finally found a stretch, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Footprints in the mud. They weren't mine. The footprints were small and barefoot, like those of a child or someone very light. Strangely, they led in the same direction I was going, but abruptly stopped where the ground was undisturbed. My heart pounded as I debated whether to keep going or turn back. Running felt like the most natural response, but running blindly through the woods was a death sentence. I pressed on, though every step felt like I was being watched, as if something was moving just beyond the edge of my vision. When night fell, I was completely drained, both physically and mentally. I set up camp hastily, convincing myself it would be the last night. But that night, there were no screams. Instead, an oppressive silence hung over everything, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. And then I heard it, the slow, deliberate sound of my tent zipper being opened. I froze, clutching the pocket knife I always kept by my sleeping bag. My body wouldn't move, but my mind screamed at me to do something. In a sudden burst of courage, I pointed my flashlight at the zipper, expecting to see something, or someone. But there was nothing. The zipper was open, and outside, only the dark void of the forest greeted me. I stepped out, my hands trembling as I searched for any sign of what had happened. That's when I saw it. Hanging from a low branch was the journal I had found earlier. It was dry now, as if it had never been wet, but its pages were completely blank. I'd had enough. I couldn't spend another night in that forest. I packed my things as quickly as I could and started walking, ignoring the darkness and the dangers of getting lost. My flashlight's beam shook as I hurried along a trail that seemed endless. But the sound of snapping branches behind me never stopped. Whatever was following me stayed just out of sight, but it was there. I could feel it. After what felt like an eternity, I finally saw something ahead, an old wooden sign pointing toward the exit. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. That's when I heard the scream again. Only this time it wasn't distant. It was right behind me. I turned, knife in hand, and shouted, "Who's there? Show yourself!" But there was nothing, only the faintest hint of movement in the shadows. I ran. My body was exhausted, but adrenaline kept me moving. When I finally broke through the trees and saw the dim glow of a road ahead, I almost collapsed from relief. I stumbled onto the asphalt, gasping for air, and turned back to look at the forest's edge. There was nothing there, no movement, no sound. The silence had returned, but it felt normal, as if the forest had let me go the moment I left. I never found out what really happened in those woods. After that night, I swore I'd never hike alone again. I still have nightmares about the screams and the sound of the zipper being opened. Some nights I wake up with the sense that something is in the room with me. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks, or maybe there was something in that forest, something that didn't want me there. Either way, I won't be going back to find out. I hadn't seen Daniel since college, nearly 10 years ago. When he messaged me suggesting a camping trip to reconnect, I accepted without hesitation. I needed a break from the city, from work, and from my routine. He picked a forested area known for its peacefulness, but also for the creepy stories about old, abandoned hunting lodges. At the time, I didn't think much of it. We were just two old friends catching up, so I wasn't really worried about legends or mysteries. We arrived early on a Friday morning, and the hike to our campsite was tougher than I'd expected. The forest was dense, with towering trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. Daniel, always the adventurous one, seemed thrilled, like we were on some grand expedition. I, on the other hand, was more focused on not tripping over the roots littering the trail. We spent most of the day walking and talking about life, but it was late afternoon when we spotted the lodge. It was small, with weathered wooden planks, but in surprisingly good condition for something out in the middle of nowhere. The door was slightly ajar, and Daniel, curious as ever, suggested we take a look inside. I hesitated, but he was already stepping through the door before I could object. Inside, the place was even stranger. It wasn't just clean. It looked like someone still used it. There were cans of food neatly stacked in one corner, a makeshift bed with folded blankets, and a calendar pinned to the wall. What sent a chill down my spine was the fact that the calendar showed the current month. Whoever had been here, it hadn't been long ago. Daniel laughed it off, saying it added to the atmosphere, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were intruding. We left quickly, not touching anything. The rest of the afternoon passed uneventfully, and night fell as we made a small fire to cook. The sounds of the forest grew louder in the dark, rustling leaves and snapping branches in the distance. We kept chatting about random things, but the image of that lodge stayed with me. Then we heard it. At first it was faint, barely noticeable, but it grew clearer with each passing minute. A steady, rhythmic sound like someone chopping wood. I glanced at Daniel, and he looked as pale as I felt. "It's probably just an echo," he said, trying to sound calm, but I could tell he didn't believe it any more than I did. We tried to ignore the sound and kept talking, but it got harder with every passing minute. The noise persisted, steady and relentless, and there was something unsettling about the direction it was coming from. In the forest, sounds tend to echo unpredictably, but this seemed close. Closer than it should have been, considering the lodge was miles away from our campsite. Finally, Daniel suggested we head into the tent and let the fire burn out. "Whatever it is, it'll go away," he said, trying to downplay the situation. I agreed, but I took a flashlight and a small knife from my pack with me. I had never felt so vulnerable in my life. The night was a nightmare. Even inside the tent, it was impossible to block out the noises outside. At some point, the sound of chopping stopped, but it was replaced by another noise. Footsteps. They weren't fast or heavy, but I could clearly hear dry leaves crunching, moving back and forth around our campsite. Every muscle in my body was tense, and I barely dared to breathe. Daniel, on the other side of the tent, seemed just as frozen as I was. It was like we were both bracing ourselves for something terrible to happen, but all we could do was listen. When dawn finally broke, I hadn't slept a second. The silence outside felt almost unnatural after what we'd been through. I stepped out of the tent with my flashlight still in hand, feeling the sunlight as a brief relief. But what we saw outside erased any sense of safety. Right next to our extinguished fire, there was a neatly stacked pile of freshly chopped wood. The cuts were clean and precise, as if someone had spent hours working on them. Daniel looked at me, trying to say something, but no words came out. There was no way this was a coincidence. We were miles away from the lodge, and as far as we knew, there was no one else out here, or so we thought. We decided to pack up and head back to the main trail as quickly as possible. While we were breaking down the campsite, Daniel found a piece of paper folded under one of our backpacks. My heart sank when he opened it. It wasn't a letter or a direct message, but a list. A list of names written in shaky handwriting. My name was on it. So was Daniel's. We looked at each other, unable to make sense of it, but the one thing we knew for sure was that we couldn't stay there another second. As we walked back, the forest felt even more oppressive, almost suffocating. Every rustle in the underbrush made my heart race. But Daniel's silence was what unnerved me the most. He'd always been the type to make jokes, to lighten the mood, but now he was serious, his eyes fixed on the trail as if speaking would make things worse. I tried to start a conversation to ease the tension, but all I could manage to say was, "Do you think someone's following us?" He shrugged, but the way he quickened his pace told me everything I needed to know. After a few hours, we reached the main road. Daniel suggested we head straight to the car without stopping, and I didn't argue. As we walked, the weight of that list in my mind only grew heavier. Who had written it? Why were our names on it? And most importantly, what did it mean? But the worst question was the one I couldn't shake. What about the other names? Who were they? Were they still alive? It was as if the entire forest had transformed into something alive, watching our every move, waiting for us to make a mistake. When we finally saw the car, it felt like spotting an oasis in the desert. Daniel ran ahead and unlocked the doors, and I practically jumped inside. We didn't exchange a single word as he started the engine and drove away as fast as he could. The road was winding, but he drove like he was escaping something. And maybe he was. The silence in the car was as thick as the forest had been. After about 15 minutes, he finally broke it with a sentence I'll never forget. "Did you see the mark on the tree near the tent?" I shook my head, confused. And he continued, "There was a freshly carved X, like a warning." I didn't know what to say. It didn't make sense. Who would have done that? And why? We spent the rest of the drive in silence, our thoughts echoing louder than any conversation could have. When we got back home, Daniel dropped me off at my door and said he'd message me, but he never did. I tried reaching out a few times, but he didn't respond. Months later, I heard from mutual friends that he'd moved to another city without telling anyone. To this day, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the sound of wood being chopped and feel the cold realization that someone, or something, knew exactly where we were that night. After that night, my life was never the same. For days, I avoided talking to anyone, as if speaking about it would make it more real. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Every time I went out, I felt like someone was following me. I started noticing small things. A shadow that seemed to linger longer than it should. Footsteps that echoed on the sidewalk behind me but stopped whenever I turned around. I tried convincing myself it was just paranoia, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. One day, while cleaning out the backpack I'd used on the trip, I found something I hadn't noticed before. A small, smooth piece of wood with a freshly carved X on it. It was tucked into one of the side pockets, and I had no idea how it got there. When I held it in my hands, a chill ran through me so strong that I almost dropped it. I knew this wasn't a coincidence. But who had put it there? And why? All I could think to do was get rid of it. I threw it away in a park near my house and ran. Even so, the strange occurrences didn't stop. For months I had nightmares about the lodge, about the list of names, about the sound of wood being chopped. In some dreams I'd wake up in the tent with someone standing outside, silently watching. In others, I saw Daniel disappearing into the forest while I was left alone. The worst part was not knowing what was just my mind playing tricks on me or if something or someone was really haunting me. My health started to deteriorate. I lost weight, couldn't sleep, and every sound at night made my heart race. In the end, I decided to leave the city. I moved to another state, to a busy urban area where the only forest I see is made of concrete. But even here, I still feel like something followed me. Sometimes I find small pieces of wood around the house, in places I know I didn't put them. Sometimes I think I hear that sound again, faint but unmistakable, and when I stop to listen, there's nothing. I've never gone camping again, and I've never spoken to Daniel since. But the thing that haunts me the most is the feeling that no matter where I go, that X is still carved into my life. I've always enjoyed camping alone. It's my way of escaping the chaos of the city, disconnecting, and truly feeling nature around me. Back then, I was 29 years old and had just quit an exhausting job. I decided to grab my backpack and drive to a forested area a friend had mentioned as perfect for quiet camping. I arrived late in the afternoon, parked my car on a deserted trail, and hiked for about 2 hours until I found what seemed like the ideal spot, surrounded by tall trees, with a stream nearby, and completely isolated. Exactly what I wanted. That first night went smoothly. I cooked something simple on my portable stove, listened to the sounds of the forest, and went to bed early. Around 2 a.m. I woke up to a strange sound. It was a faint knock-knock coming from outside my small tent. For a moment I thought I was dreaming, but the sound came again, clearer this time. I grabbed my flashlight, trying to convince myself it was just some curious animal. I unzipped the tent slowly and shone the light around, but there was nothing there, only trees and darkness. The next morning, the uneasiness from the night before still lingered, but I decided to ignore it. Maybe I had imagined it, or it was just some bird or raccoon messing with the tent. But as I started folding the fabric outside, I noticed something that made me freeze. There were small, muddy handprints scattered along the side of the tent. They were tiny, almost childlike, but that was impossible. I was miles from any road or campsite. My fingers trembled as I traced over the prints, trying to come up with a logical explanation. I brushed it off and told myself it was just a weird illusion, or maybe I was too tired to think straight. But that night, things escalated. I fell asleep early, only to be woken up again by the same knocking. This time, it was louder, more insistent, like someone or something was trying to provoke me. The darkness outside felt heavier, and the silence between the knocks was almost deafening. I already had my flashlight in hand when I mustered the courage to look outside again. But the moment I unzipped the tent, the knocking stopped. Once again, there was nothing, just the swaying trees and the distant sound of the stream. The next morning, my tent was once again covered in handprints, but this time they were different. They were still muddy but larger, like a child had suddenly grown overnight. I spent a good while examining them, trying to make sense of it. I looked around the campsite, searching for footprints or any sign that someone had been there, but the ground was untouched. It was as if those hands had appeared out of nowhere and vanished just as mysteriously. I started questioning my sanity, but the heavy feeling in my chest told me something more was going on. By nightfall, I was restless. I built a bigger fire, hoping it would scare off whatever, or whoever, was out there. But as the hours passed and the darkness deepened, the feeling of being watched became unbearable. When the knocking began again, this time much louder and more persistent, my heart nearly stopped. It was a dry, heavy sound, like someone was pounding on the tent fabric with purpose. I shouted something, trying to sound brave, but my voice cracked. I grabbed a knife that was next to me, flashlight in the other hand, and stepped outside in a burst of adrenaline. The cold bit at my skin as I stood there, scanning the pitch-black forest. The silence was almost complete, except for the faint sound of the stream in the distance. My flashlight could only cut through small portions of the dense darkness, but I knew something was there. The weight of the night seemed to close in around me, and for a split second, I thought I saw a shadow dart between the trees. My stomach churned, and I couldn't move for what felt like an eternity. I rushed back into the tent, zipped it shut with trembling hands, and sat there clutching the knife and waiting for dawn. When the sun finally rose, I made up my mind to pack everything and leave. Whatever this was, I wanted no part of it. But as I started to pack up, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were new handprints on the tent, even larger than the night before, and they were spread all over, as if something had crawled around it while I slept. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to finish packing and began the trek back to my car, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. Yet as I walked, the feeling of being followed grew stronger. The faint sound of footsteps behind me became impossible to ignore. At first, it was just a sensation, but soon I could hear it clearly, twigs snapping, leaves crunching. It was subtle, almost calculated, like whatever was following me knew how to stay just out of sight. Every time I stopped and turned around, the sound stopped too. My flashlight felt useless against the dense forest, barely piercing the shadows. My heart pounded so hard that it drowned out any rational thought. After nearly an hour of walking, I finally saw my car in the distance. It felt like a lifeline, a sanctuary in the middle of this nightmare. I sprinted the last few steps, threw my backpack into the back seat, and slammed the driver's door shut with enough force to echo through the trees. That's when I noticed something chilling: the silence. The footsteps had stopped. The forest was unnervingly quiet, except for the sound of my own heavy breathing and the hum of the engine when I turned the key. Relief started to wash over me, but then I looked at the windshield. Right in front of me, on the fogged-up glass, was a massive handprint. It wasn't human. The fingers were too long, ending in sharp, claw-like points. I froze, unable to process what I was seeing. The handprint was on the outside of the glass, and I knew for certain no one had been near my car when I got in. Every instinct in me screamed to get out of there, but I couldn't bring myself to step outside. Instead, I slammed the gas pedal and sped down the trail as fast as I could, desperate to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever was out there. I made it home just before dawn, utterly exhausted and still shaking. I thought the ordeal was over, but that night, as I lay in bed, I heard a sound that made my stomach drop. Knock knock. This time, it was at my bedroom window. I didn't dare move. I stayed frozen in bed, gripping my phone like it could somehow protect me. When I finally worked up the courage to look, there was nothing outside. But the next morning, the handprints were back, bigger, spread across the glass like whatever it was had been pressing its face and hands against it. The following days became a nightmare. Every morning I'd find those handprints somewhere new, on the windows, the front door, even the bathroom mirror. They were growing each time, as though it was getting bolder or closer. I locked everything at night, barricaded windows and doors with furniture, and barely ate or slept. It felt like it was waiting for me to make a mistake, to let my guard down. Desperate for answers, I installed cameras around the house, hoping to catch whatever it was. That first night I stayed awake, watching the monitors with the lights off and a knife in my lap. For hours, nothing happened. I started to think maybe it had given up. But just after 3 a.m., one of the cameras started glitching, the one overlooking the backyard. When the feed came back, I saw it. A tall, spindly figure stood just at the edge of the camera's light. Its arms were unnaturally long, its fingers ending in sharp claws. Its head was tilted slightly, almost like it was watching me through the camera. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then, the camera cut out completely. That's when I knew I couldn't stay. Whatever it wasn't going to stop. I grabbed a bag with the essentials, jumped into my car, and drove aimlessly through the night. I haven't been back to that house since. I now move constantly, renting places for short periods, never staying long enough to feel safe. But no matter where I go, the knocks sometimes find me, always on the quietest nights. I still have the footage from that night, but I've never shown it to anyone. Who would believe me? The only thing I know for sure is that whatever it is, it's still looking for me. I don't know why, and I probably never will. If you ever go camping alone and hear knocks on your tent, don't unzip it. Just stay still, and pray it's not too late. I've been a single dad ever since my wife left us 2 years ago. Since then, my daughter Emily and I have been trying to understand each other better. She's 16 now, and with her teenage years came a distance I didn't know how to bridge. So last summer, I decided a short hiking trip might be a good idea. Just the two of us, no distractions, away from everything. I picked a state park with some less traveled trails, a place where we could reconnect and forget, even for just a weekend, the chaos back home. Emily didn't seem too excited, but she agreed. Deep down, I think she knew I was trying my best. We arrived at the park early on a Saturday morning. The air was fresh, and the trail we chose was nearly deserted. It was perfect. There was something calming about the sound of the leaves rustling and the crunch of our boots on the dirt. Emily was glued to her phone while I adjusted my backpack and sorted our supplies, but eventually she put it away, and we started walking together. The trail was narrow, flanked by tall trees that blocked most of the sunlight, but occasional clearings made the surroundings feel less suffocating. The sense of isolation was strangely comforting, at least at first. It was about an hour and a half into the hike when we saw him for the first time. He appeared out of nowhere, walking toward us from the opposite direction, carrying an old, worn-out backpack and wearing a cap that looked smudged with mud. He smiled awkwardly and said hello. I didn't think much of it at the time. Emily barely nodded, clearly uncomfortable, but we kept walking after a brief, "Good morning." He mentioned something about being lost and asked if we'd seen a trail leading to a river. He said he'd been camping alone for days and got confused with the maps. I gave him a vague answer because, honestly, I wasn't entirely sure myself. After that, Emily and I continued on our way, trying to maintain our pace. But something about the encounter stuck with me. I can't quite explain it. Maybe it was the way he looked at Emily a second longer than he should have, or how he seemed uneasy, like he was hiding something. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling lingered. Then, about 2 hours later, we saw him again. This time he was ahead of us, as if he'd taken a shortcut and waited for us to pass. He waved again, but his smile now seemed out of place. Emily glanced at me as if she wanted to ask why he was there again, but she didn't say a word. We walked past him without much conversation, but the unease was now undeniable. I think it was after that second encounter that I started paying more attention. I began noticing things that I hadn't before. Emily, on the other hand, seemed eager to ignore it. She put her headphones on and kept walking, but I couldn't relax. It wasn't just the fact that we'd seen the man twice in completely different spots. It was the way he seemed to appear right in sync with us. It was almost like he was watching us, planning his next move. At that point, I decided it would be better to cut the hike short and head back to the campsite earlier than planned. When we got back to the campsite, the sun was already dipping behind the mountains. Emily was in charge of organizing our things while I went to gather some firewood. Our campsite was in an isolated clearing far from the main trail, but it was comfortable enough. When I returned, Emily was sitting on the log we used as a bench, but there was something off about her expression. "Dad, did you mess with our stuff?" she asked, pointing at the backpack she'd left near the tent. I shook my head and she frowned, standing up to show me. Our map, my multi-tool knife, and one of the small snack packs were missing. My heart raced, but I tried not to show my panic to Emily. I searched through everything, but the missing items were nowhere to be found. Then I heard a sound in the distance, something that sounded like footsteps among the trees. It was almost imperceptible, but the silence around us made it louder. "Emily, get in the tent," I said firmly, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated, but obeyed. I stood outside, focusing on the direction of the sound. But all I saw were the shadows of the trees swaying in the breeze. Still, I knew we weren't alone. Later, as I lit the campfire, we heard a noise coming from the trail. The man appeared again, but this time he was holding something. It was our map. "Did you lose this?" he asked, wearing that same strange smile. His voice was friendly, but there was something off about his posture, like he was forcing the casual tone. "I found it farther up the trail and thought you might need it." I thanked him cautiously and took the map, but the sense of relief I hoped for didn't come. Emily peeked out from the tent, her wide, frightened eyes saying everything. I knew this wasn't a coincidence. I tried to keep a neutral expression while talking to the man, but every nerve in my body was on edge. "Thanks for bringing the map," I said, trying to sound casual. He lingered for a few seconds, almost like he was waiting for something. Finally, he mentioned that he was camping nearby and that we could call for him if we needed help. But he never said where exactly he was camping, and he didn't seem to have enough supplies for someone who'd been out in the woods for days. Once he finally walked away and disappeared down the trail, I went into the tent with Emily. "Dad, he took our stuff, didn't he?" she whispered, her voice shaking. I didn't want to lie. "I think so, but we'll stay alert," I said, trying to mask my unease. Night fell quickly and the forest around us felt denser than it had during the day. The fire was the only thing standing between us and total darkness. Emily begged me to pack up and head back to the car, but the idea of walking the trail at night, especially with that man lurking around, seemed even more dangerous. I decided we'd stay at the campsite, but I wasn't planning to sleep deeply. I kept my flashlight within reach and held on to the smaller knife we still had. Every snap of a twig or rustling leaf made my body tense like a coiled spring. Around midnight, Emily nudged me awake. "Dad, someone's out there," she whispered, her face pale. I grabbed the flashlight and prepared to open the tent, but before I could, we heard heavy footsteps circling the campsite. It was impossible to tell how many people were out there, but the sound was slow and deliberate, like they wanted us to know they were there. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum. I waited a few seconds and then, in one quick motion, unzipped the tent and turned on the flashlight. There was no one there. Just the faint glow of the fire dying out and the darkness swallowing the edges of the clearing. I went back inside, but the silence outside made everything feel even more suffocating. Emily was curled up in the corner of the tent, clutching her blanket tightly. I knew I had to do something, but I couldn't risk stepping outside without knowing what was waiting for us. Then I noticed something even stranger. The map the man had returned wasn't the same as before. There were new pen marks on it, showing a trail that led to an isolated spot far from the main path. It almost looked like an invitation. My blood ran cold as I realized this wasn't just a coincidence. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. The fire had gone out completely, and the silence outside seemed to mock how vulnerable we were. Emily was quietly sobbing, trying not to make any noise, and I knew I had to make a decision. As soon as the first light of dawn peeked over the horizon, I decided we were leaving. We couldn't risk staying another night. "Pack your things quickly, Emily. We're leaving now," I whispered. She nodded, still pale, and started gathering her belongings while I packed up what little we had left. But when we stepped out of the tent, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Footprints circled our campsite. A lot of them. It looked like someone, or several people, had been walking around us for hours. The feeling of being watched was suffocating as we started back down the trail. Emily walked close to me, and I kept the flashlight in my hand even though daylight was creeping through the trees. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. We were about a mile away from the car when we saw something that made us freeze. The man was standing in the middle of the trail, as if he had been waiting for us. This time, he wasn't smiling. "You need to leave, quickly," he said in a low voice, almost too soft to hear. There was something different about him now. He looked scared. He kept glancing around like he was expecting something to emerge from the shadows. Without thinking, I grabbed Emily's arm and started running. I didn't look back. I didn't care if he was following us or if something else was. I just wanted to reach the car. When we finally broke through the trees and saw the parking lot, it felt like a massive weight was lifted off my shoulders. We climbed into the car, and as I started the engine, I glanced toward the trail. He was standing there at the edge, just watching us. His eyes were dark, like he carried a burden I would never understand. I didn't wait to find out more. I floored the gas and sped away as fast as I could. Even now, months later, I still try to make sense of what happened in that forest. The man, the map, the footprints around our campsite. It all feels like a puzzle I can't solve. Emily refuses to talk about it, and I avoid bringing it up, but one thing is certain. I'll never go back to that place. Some experiences leave marks that time can't erase. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't left that morning. But maybe it's better not to know.